So I'd like to introduce Lou Jepsen, who's one of the premier kind of get-it-done in engineers in the country. She did the $100 laptop at a time when that seemed like an unreasonable goal to be able to actually do. I'm very impressed with the technology that she's created, but we're also looking at it, and we'll talk about this later, as a potential hub and a spoke model, where would it be possible to have a new company that had a venture, a backable component, but had higher risk things they might want to do, which could be a joint venture without economic risk to the parent, which enabled them to have other types of funding, essentially. And I'll just get over here and be quiet and hear you talk.
Oh, cool. Thanks, everybody. So what's up? We're talking for 20 minutes, and then I'm talking for 20, then we're talking together for 10? OK, cool. So slides. I'm going to talk about OpenWater. I'm amazed, like a half a dozen of my investors are in this room, so it's so great to see them all. And I've got some demos up here to explain what I'm doing. Just as a background, I've sort of done all like .org, .gov, .com, .littlecom, 4 startups, and I ran portions of advanced consumer electronics at Google and Facebook. Before that, I was a CTO of a division at Intel. I've shipped billions of dollars worth of consumer electronics. So I'm kind of crashing here because I think part of the solution to what we're talking about is in consumer electronics. And I'll explain what I mean. I think that we can replace the functionality of a multi-million-dollar MRI and fMRI machine with a consumer electronics wearable in very few years, like single-digit number of years, very small single-digit numbers of years. And as impossible as that sounds, I'm going to explain to you why I'm convinced it's inevitable. It's happening, and we need to think about how to do this as well as we can, leveraging the industry, because the implications of this are profound. You saw all the talks this morning using fMRI for precision diagnosis of psychiatry rather than just like, are you sleeping a lot? Are you hungry? Do you feel suicidal? Like actually having biological basis of that is important for the brain-mind part, but also it can enable us to communicate telepathically with each other, as has been shown by neuroscientists using fMRI machines now for about a decade. If I throw you in an MRI machine for an hour, I can tell you if you've got a tumor or something. If I do it for 10, 100, 1,000 hours, I can tell you what words you're about to say, what images are in your head, whether you're in love or not, and on and on and on. So it's totally cool. So what we're trying to do is put this into a wearable, a ski hat, a bandage, a pillow, a blanket, and so forth. 2/3 of humanity lacks access to medical imaging. You might be saying, well, I'm at Stanford, I have my MRI machine, I'm good. It's still $8,000. That's the going rate here in Palo Alto for an MRI scan. Not everybody can afford it, certainly in the developing world. The death rate due to cancer in Brazil is triple what it is here, partially due to lack of early diagnosis, which could be enabled by low-cost medical imaging. And I mentioned that if I throw you in an MRI scanner for a long time, I can even read what you're dreaming about. You can dump your dreams out, grainy visions of that. You can do that right now. That's been being done for 10 years. So when I saw this work, I'll admit it, I thought the brain mapping people were kind of modern day phrenologists. And I saw this work around 2010, 2011. I'm like, whoa, if we just got to up the resolution, lower the cost, it's time to help. So I've been sort of figuring out how to do that since. So I started this company called OpenWater about 2 years ago, and one of the first times I talked about it is at, I guess, version 0 of this conference 2 years ago. And this is a bit of an update of where we've gotten. We pushed ourselves for the whole first year to figure out the limits of the physics, like how deep we could go, what kind of resolution. And the answer that we got to is 6 inches and 5 microns, which means we can read and write neurons non-invasively by delivering light, near-infrared light, deep into the skull. And with optogenetics, or even without optogenetics, read the state of a neuron and write the state of a neuron. That's possible with our technology. We're focused on different first products, but it's possible. That's why it's exciting to talk to you all. So how does this work? So the first key, you know this if you were a kid and you ever went outside in the dark and took a flashlight and cupped your hand around it. Our bodies are translucent to near-infrared light and red light. It goes right through. Our bodies are also translucent to gamma rays, to X-rays, to 2-ton magnets making a really precise medical field. But lowly red light is our bodies are translucent to. So let me show you what kind of implication that can have. If I take, I got pork chop today. But if I take this pork chop and I put it on this light, you can see one part's darker. That's where I implanted the tumor backstage. And that's because tumors have 5 times the amount of blood as regular tissue. So that means we can see tumors using red light. There's nothing super special about this light, but there's a trick. If I take another pork chop and put it on top, you can no longer see the tumor because the light scatters. And so if we want to be able to see that tumor so we can catch it early, we have to figure out how to descatter the light. And that's what I think we're on the cusp of because of the trickle down of Moore's law hitting the lowly LCD fabs and camera chip fabs that I've lived and breathed in for a long time. I'm just going to try to cover that. So, and the trick to this is holography, which is an area I happened to spend the first decade of my career on, electroholography. And by holography, it's got a lot of different definitions. I do not mean Tupac appearing live on stage in Las Vegas. I mean the thing that won the Nobel Prize in the early 70s, which is recording the amplitude and phase of light. So you record the full wavefront, all of the light from all of the angles, all of the time. And what that enables us to do, this is a model of scattering. Imagine the marbles are photons, and they're scattering. Every 1/10 of a millimeter in your body, there's a scattering event. Like this thing here. I should probably put something more opaque on it so it doesn't bother anybody. And so if we record a hologram at the bottom of this scattering matrix, and then bring in the marbles from below, we can direct each marble to the exactly right position and angle such that we get them to go in reverse and emerge as a stream of marbles. So that's with marbles. We did that for real with a piece of brain. This is optically identical to brain, and you can see it scatters. By doing that, by putting a hologram in front of this brain, we get, I hope you can see it, this telays. That's not with 50 marbles like in the last images. That's with billions, trillions of photons all lining up as directed by the hologram to go through the brain. So you're probably thinking, that sounds great, but what about skull? How are you going to get through skull? So that's really a human skull, and I brought some today. This is a real human skull. You can buy it online. No one was killed. Well, somebody died. Gave their lives to skullsunlimited.com. No joke. So yeah, you see the light goes right through the skull. Bones are white. So who's the optic? I have a PhD in optics, but it doesn't take this. Like, this is like black. It absorbs light. White stuff transmits light. So it scatters everywhere, but we descatter the light. And so that's super key. So then we sort of said, well, how fast, how far, and how fine can we focus through skull and bone? And I did this live on stage at TED in April, focus through skull, optically identical skull and brain to a few microns, which is the diameter of the smallest neuron. Seems impossible, but it's not impossible. And the really cool thing about all of this is holography is possible now. I made a holographic video system in the late 80s at MIT Media Lab, world's first holographic video system with a team of graduate students, handmade my 1-micron pixels to enable us to compute the hologram and then show the holographic video in real time. Every single person in this room, every single person on this planet has had 1-micron pixels on the cameras of their smartphones for 5 years. That's why we can do it now, because the consumer electronic manufacturing infrastructure enables it. So what we've been doing for the last 2 years, this circa last winter was our big lab scale prototype where we could scan different phantom tissues like this and find the tumor embedded inside. And it looks pretty big. Don't worry, I'm going to talk to that pretty quickly. These are the kinds of images that we were able to find embedded in things like this. And there's a reason we could only do phantoms and whatever was on sale at the meat market, because we were using continuous wave lasers. There's this issue in imaging live people. We're alive. It's good to be alive, but that means we breathe, we move, and our blood moves. And so fast forward, how fast do you have to go to strobe light your body so that you don't get what's called the speckle changing? So the scattering properties don't change. It's a bit like a flash or a strobe. We figured that out. It's about a microsecond. We've built a laser that pulses the light in a microsecond with the coherence that we need. We've got actually 2 of them. One came in literally yesterday to our labs at 300 millijoules per pulse. We've got another one coming in at 10 millijoules per pulse, enabling us to see through live animals for the first time. So we're replacing that big lab rig where we've used existing off-the-shelf chips with custom chips that massively improve the signal-to-noise ratio and massively shrink down the system. So what this enables us to do is to have MRI and IR, very high resolution. We're really good at seeing blood. We're really good at seeing other indicators. And we're going to be showing some images at the end of this year of what we get with live animals. We just moved into our live animal facility this week, and we've shrunk down the system to this size. And I'm going to explain a little bit how this whole system works. But we use an ultrasonic array to send out pings and a camera chip and a laser. That's what we use. That replaces the functionality of a multi-million-dollar MRI machine with a 2-ton magnet, with a power plant that powers it, with magnetic shielding all around it, and don't forget about the liquid helium you have to pour in it constantly. So what we're doing for next year is building that out into what we're calling an alpha kit. This is kind of bulky for us. Our goal is a wearable, but an alpha kit where you can scan. These are basically mosaicked. We can mosaic. You're probably going to ask about the depth and scan speed, but we mosaic our chipsets so that we can go with more depth with more of them. It's a modular system where we use a small, medium, and large laser that this is tethered to, and the arrays, depending upon the resolution and scan speed and depth that you want, and software reconfigurable. So how does it work? You probably get body's translucent to near-infrared light, scatters it. We can descatter it with holography, but how do you scan out the body? So we combine a sound approach. We literally use sound, sonic pings like this, replacing that. So we focus into the brain, for example. Focus down, and then we shine red light in that goes everywhere. And you're probably thinking, well, why don't you start in the same time? And the answer's obvious. Sound is slower than light, so we want them to end up at the same place at the same time. So we start the sonic ping first. The light that goes through the sonic ping changes color ever so slightly. And that really matters. Has anybody in the room ever made a hologram? Yeah. So, oh, right, James. Yeah, we took our first class together when we were 18 years old as freshmen at Brown. Yeah, I fell in love with it. So you can traditionally just use a single laser, and you have to split that single laser into 2 beams, and you can only make a hologram by beating those 2 beams off of each other. But it's 2018 now, and we can just frequency shift our reference beam using an acousto-optic modulator and bring it in through a light guide plate, much like is in these things. So you have an array of LEDs, and the light comes out. Pretty standard stuff. I've shipped a lot of screens over my time. And so those are the 2 beams that are beating together, the disk of light there, and, so if we zero in, we record a hologram. A hologram are those fringes, that ringing fringes. So there's a sea of that red light, and then we differentiate the LSBs on the chip, which we've optimized with a deep quantum well, so that we can see those ripples really well with optimized near-infrared light, which, as it happens, when I quit my cushy job at Facebook 2.5 years ago, I hoped this would be going into next-generation smartphones. And it turns out, for once, I was right. It is. The next-generation smartphones have 70% quantum efficiency in the near-infrared. Today's have 7 in the near-infrared with RGB color filters over the camera chips so you can see in the visible. And this is being put in place for 3D sensing, and for sort of augmented reality on a smartphone, which is like Pokemon Go ++, or scan your body and figure out if the clothes will fit, stuff like that. So those components are mainstream. They'll be close to 500 lasers in most of next year's smartphones to send out structured light to decode that. So we're basically right on that, backdrafting right onto that, a bit like a bicyclist with somebody like leading and spending the money. Also, what's now standard are these stacked chip cameras where the second layer is logic. And that becomes important because I bet you somebody is going to ask how fast you can go. And the answer is, the bottleneck is how fast you have to take those pixels off that camera chip. Usually people go 30 or 60 frames per second. Our architectures show 100,000 frames per second because we do the real-time decoding, a discrete Fourier transform on chip, and we pull off one number per frame because that represents a voxel. Because this pattern on that camera chip represents that information from that point, that voxel. So we can then optionally focus the light back down to deliver photodynamic therapy, to stimulate a neuron, and so forth. But we have focused ultrasound already. So we've been in collaboration with the Focused Ultrasound Foundation that has, in the last 10 years, studied the 18 different modalities to use focused ultrasound for surgery. And it turns out that we have enough power. We use about from 0.1 to 1 megapascal, but for a microsecond, as a sonic ping to image to find out what's happening to frequency shift that light. If we put a megapascal on for 15 seconds, we can ablate the tissue, we can open up the blood-brain barrier, we can take micro bubbles and burst drugs to deliver in just that area. We can lower chemo doses by 25-fold. We can do all of these things that are being sort of invented throughout academia with this modality of just using camera chips, ultrasonic chips, and a laser. So then, of course, the next thing that we do in this little cartoon, I sort of got over into telling you about photodynamic therapy, but then we focus to the next spot, and that's how we scan out the brain. So each time we focus a spot with the ultrasonic, then we turn on the laser and record a hologram and decode the hologram. So we decode that hologram a lot like Rosalind Franklin decoded this iconic image of X-ray diffraction to reveal the structure of DNA for the first time. But we do it at about 1 million times a second because we have really good logic, and it's 2018 now. So one of the things that you're probably thinking, well, why not just use ultrasound? And it's because ultrasound, A, doesn't really get great contrast, or we get really great contrast with the blood. And I show some blood there. I have some blood here. I bought it on Amazon. It's fake, but like it's optically identical. And you can see the blood is absorbed by this laser. And here's my pound of flesh. And you can see it scatters. And so we can see the difference. Your eyes can see the difference. Here's the blood and the flesh. So that's super key because, as I mentioned, tumors have 5 times the amount of blood as normal flesh. And also, we care a lot about where blood isn't. There were some nice images this morning of clogged hearts. We can see where blood isn't. And we can also see the color change blood makes when it's carrying oxygen versus not carrying oxygen. And that peaks for oxygenated blood at 720 nanometers and for deoxygenated blood at 820 nanometers. The reason we care about oxygenated blood versus deoxygenated blood is that's exactly what fMRI does in the 2-ton magnet with those images you saw this morning. So we're talking about doing that using the consumer electronics supply chain and reducing an fMRI to this size and to a consumer electronics price point. And this is, I'm actually fighting my team. I think this is a little bit bulky, so we're still working on slimming it down. We want it to be in a wearable kind of like this, or that can line a ski hat or a pillow or many different modalities. And so that's, oops, almost hit the laser and took somebody out. So camera chip architecture, a little bit different. 1 micron pixels, 1 microsecond frame time, double stack architecture, standard manufacturing processes now at TSMC. Samsung and Sony have triple stack chips, which you could do even more on if anybody has good friends at Samsung or Sony, but TSMC is pretty good. So we design chips at my company, so we're architecting these chips and taping them out. And I mentioned that we've had to build our own lasers. It was really strange. We have now like 2 Nobel prize winners in laser physics who have now joined as advisors because they were so excited, like, cool laser, and they're helping us develop lasers. But we've built some lasers out that do this. And on the beacon, on the focused ultrasound, now a standard process using MEMS processes anywhere. And there's also PMOT, there's so-called CMOT, capacitive, and PMOT, piezo processes in a few of the fabs that enable us to basically delay the signal that goes to each subcomponent in the silicon, and then we can steer the beam around wherever we wish to quite quickly, no moving parts. So scan speed up to 100,000 frames per second, or voxels a second, is what we're looking at per element, but you can multiplex to get to 1 million. How deep? It's a function of the safety limits for light, which is 20 millijoules per centimeter squared. So if you're thinking like an obese patient, I'm just going to point out, I know it sounds rude, they have more surface area. It's a surface area constrained problem. The light falls off with the square of the depth, and then you take the focus size divided by the surface area of the hemisphere at that depth, which is pi, I can't remember, you remember. What's the surface area of a hemisphere? 2 pi r squared. So that's yeah, I'm nervous or something, I don't know. And then the surface area of the chips. So you put in more chips, you get more signal. It costs more. And so it really depends on this modular system what you want to build. And so and then you tether it via fiber optic to a small, medium, or large laser. So that's really where we're going. And I'm 0, but that's good because we've got 10 minutes to talk on my next 2 slides. So yeah, changing the way we read and write our bodies and brains so we can diagnose and treat and so forth at 1,000 times cheaper than current medical imaging and 1 billion times smaller with potentially 1 billion times higher resolution. So it's a lot of zeros, but we're going for it, and it works. So thank you, and I think Michael's joining me on stage.
Thank you, Mary. So we'll keep this short in the interest of
yeah, I have a couple slides
moving along.
that I made just for you.
But
yeah, we're done.
Maybe we'll move this a little bit to the side. Would you?
Oh wait, it's a little bit tricky because it's. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
In our conversations, you've talked a lot about the difference between creating a wonderful science, proving it'll work, how to make it smaller, and then how to commercialize it. And you've talked a lot about things you'd hope to do with the technology, but they might not be your first opening, bets.
Go to market. I just raised a round, almost done, and there's a bunch of my generous investors in the room, but go to market was the #1 question on how we're going to make sure we don't overspend. And so we found a solution to that, which isn't the most interesting, but no FDA, no reimbursement, existing market enables you to do a faster go-to-market. And even here today, people who know me are saying, when can I get a developer kit? And I don't mean to be, we haven't decided. We're going to try to do everything we can to get more people developer kits. We're trying to figure out the structure for that so that we can enable more to happen. Sorry if I...
No, absolutely true. So are there things that you would like to do if you had non-dilutive capital to your core investors? If you had money that didn't dilute out your core investors somehow, are there applications for your technology you'd like to look into?
Yeah, I have just 2 slides for this discussion. Should I go for them?
Yep.
One, we're a venture-backed startup. Excel One led first round, Vinod led second round, taking us to alpha kits.
Right.
And so we have this, so we're just standard Silicon Valley, scale, hockey stick, but how can we enable more is your question. So that brings us to the next slide. And I really am uncomfortable showing this slide. I did this for you and for Tom Khalil, because this is the diagram, as I recall, that Tom Khalil put up at SciFu at Google a few months ago. For my investors, we're not doing this. This is for discussion purposes only. We could do it, but this is not the plan. Right now the plan is the plan we've discussed with you.
But the point is that you would protect, but the point is when we talked to Tom and had that discussion.
Yes.
Tom, thank you for breaking us up with our binary thinking that we had as either has to be
Should we
one or
get
the
Tom on
other.
stage?
Tom, do you want to come up here too, Tom?
Do you want to join us? Oh, okay.
Okay, fine. So this is something we would actually welcome the group, and this is how I can have it be awfully short. This is not a model we understand or bringing to your company or even to the group as something that we understand yet, but it's clear talking to Tom and others that there's probably pathways to create joint ventures and have a hybrid, like a hub and a spoke model.
Like, for example, I gave a TED talk on this in April. Probably some of you saw it. It finally went online. I shouldn't say finally. It went online about a week and a half ago, and I've gotten, like the head of breast imaging at this university wanting to talk about breast imaging, and then the coronary imaging, and then the other imaging. It's like, it's all imaging. It's all the same fMRI, PET, or CT. But does it really have to be different to engage? Yes, from the foundation perspective, because there's like people focused on certain diseases, and if they want to accelerate things, well, they know more about that disease than we do, and what should we emphasize? And so from the way I look at it, like, we can just read and write the body and brain. It doesn't matter if you want to pick a part, we're good, or pick an animal.
Right.
But from the perspective of the $115 billion for philanthropic and what is it from government? I think
30
I added
for
it.
philanthropic, 120 total. A lot of money anyway.
Yeah, well, and your bar chart, but it was only 10 billion for VC, which was the smallest, which is the easiest for me to do because I do consumer electronics, so scale, it's sort of straightforward. This is it, let's go for it, and try to hit the hockey stick. But while we're doing it, can we take more shots on goal and enable some longer range stuff? We'd love to if we can. One thing we want to have is, IP and data. Everybody wants that. What's that negotiation look like? And then what's the responsibility around that, which I think you touched upon. But we're kind of open, but we actually, little plug, we need to hire somebody to help us think about this. We're hiring a lot of people, but like somebody to really think about how we're sort of calling it a chief product officer, but like that's probably too crass because it's like, how do we make things that change people's lives, right?
Yeah, and I think to point it to under the rules of a PRI and those things, you wouldn't be able to say tag along with a full economic, venture investment on equal terms because that would be perceived as using the money for economic gain as opposed to helping on mission essentially. So oddly enough, use of a PRI, if it were part of a JV, has to be at terms that aren't as advantageous as the venture in investors. So we still have to work through how this might work for you or for someone else. The kind of the energies of it is that there's probably a pathway for the hub and spoke model to actually infuse the parent with essentially non-dilutive capital to advance its possibilities, while the PRIs and foundations could be hunting for areas of interest with a platform technology.
Right. I mean, I co-founded One Laptop Per Child in 2005 with Nicholas Negroponte. Got asked by MIT to get it out of my system because it wasn't a suitable thing for a professor to do. They said, just get out of your system, then come back. But so like, you can't do things as a professor because that sort of, even though it was a not-for-profit, it seemed too strange, seemed too open for perhaps litigation or whatever if we screwed up. And at the time, I mean, I think we had 3,000 different OLPC groups. One Laptop Per Child was the name of the organization globally. We didn't know what they were doing. We were just trying to get laptops to them to, nobody sued us that I'm aware of. There could have been things, but like it's how do you like scale that up community and make it happen, and it's sort of giving this independence. And so how do we do that here with not just this, but all of the great stuff that you all are doing, because most people want to hold onto control, and you sort of give that up if you want to scale big. And so especially if you're a venture-backed company, because there's sort of tendency to be super secretive and hold all the IP and wait to release when you ship seems to me to always fail when I do it that way, because I do hardware. And I think you can make it inevitable by getting the crazy people of the world to beat a path to your door, because you're not going to do it alone. You're going to do it with a whole group of people. The stuff we're trying to do is so big.
Yeah.
There's plenty of credit for something so big, so everybody can have
absolutely.
face
You've
in
got
the sun.
so much to add. I'd like to take a question from the group for Mary. We have about 2.5 minutes. Or is this so complete we won't do that? Anything else you'd like for the people to know, Mary?
Oh, there's some
Wait,
hands up back
I'm
there.
sorry, I didn't see it in the light. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a question about ownership of data. So if you go to a community model and you start contributing data on a non-profit basis, or in the expectation that the data is helping humanity or a full,
Yep.
how would you handle ownership of that data that belongs to the company or foundation?
There was a Supreme Court case on non-profits hiring, like, say, a person to give away an auto and as a service, so that someone could donate an auto as a tax-free deduction, and a for-profit would handle the sale. So this has not worked out, but there seems to be room to breathe, essentially.
Well, you make a deal, right? Like, if people want our components, which they do, we're asking that we can have anonymized data, but what data it's all negotiation, right?
Yep.
But if you want to enable this really cool work to happen, you want to get it out there. And then, oh, by the way, I do hardware, so there's this thing, the sincerest form of flattery, emulation. So I just assume, once it's out there, I don't know, do you think 1,000 engineers at pick your company and pick your Asian country will be put on reverse engineering? I do. Everything I do assumes that. So that's why the discussions for the public good and the ethical constraints around it prior and now, while we're in development, are so important.
Yep.
And so it's doesn't actually help to sort of keep it that secret. Once you've got something that you're shipping, assume that people will copy it if it's any good.
Cool.
And if it's not good, well, then he failed too. So then just make that assumption in the deals that you're making.
Right.
So if you don't make a decent deal, the next person will, and it's not the best technology that ever wins, right?
Right.
It's other things that many people in the room could talk with great expertise about.
Mary, thank you for coming.
Thank you.